Ocarina of Time 3D was a great visual upgrade to the N64 version. Now, we actually did a dungeon ranking for the N64 version way back in the day.
Time ago.
When we first started and had no clue what we were doing. But
we still don't, to be honest.
We know more, though. We know more than we did. But it's kind of a ranking we always wanted to go back and kind of redo because it's one of our favorite Zelda games, and this 3D remake offered us that chance.
Especially because we felt that the changes they made really did impact how we felt about a lot of the dungeons in the game. And as you'll see, our ranking comes out a little bit differently than our original Nintendo 64.
Well, we weren't going to do it unless the ranking came out differently.
No,
There'd be no reason.
Not.
Now, going along with that, we also included Inside Ganon's Castle for this video. We didn't do it in the original because I think we're kind of on the pennants, like medallions. Those are the true dungeons. And Ganon's Castle was kind of a final challenge, but we wanted to include that one.
And going along with Ganon's Castle, we decided to include both the Ganondorf fight and the final Ganon fight. We feel like
and also escaping the castle, when it's crumbling down.
We felt like that was all part of the Ganon's Castle experience.
Now remember, these are just our opinions, and that's one thing that's really fun about this channel is you have two guys right here that we never agree on anything. So we have different opinions, and if you have different opinions, that's cool. We're not sitting here bashing your dungeons, but leave a comment of what your ranking actually is.
And if you stick around to the end of this video, as Hick mentioned, we differ in our individual rankings as well, and you'll see that if you stick around to the end.
This is our Ocarina of Time 3D dungeon ranking.
Let's go to the video.
I'm not a fan of the concept of a dungeon being inside of a fish, and I'm also not a fan of pink areas that are this wide open.
Me neither, trust me. But how about the concept we're escorting a fish girl while we're inside the belly of a fish?
That was a pain. I did not appreciate her attitude whatsoever.
Me
and then
neither.
The theme, there's really no theme to the dungeon. It's just a bunch of digested sounds.
Now the mini-boss, Big Octo, wasn't necessarily difficult, but getting the timing to where he's actually facing the right direction was a pain.
Now, one thing I did like in this dungeon was the boomerang. Just a very fun item and very fun to use.
And it was used very well in the boss fight, and as much as we've ragged on this dungeon, I actually like the boss fight.
I like how he has those enemies kind of circling around him right there.
Yes.
There's all the electricity that comes along with him.
Plus, it just looks like a giant internal parasite inside Jabu-Jabu.
It looks like it would be causing problems. For like a fish, there's a reason he's not feeling good, and it makes sense that this is what's causing it.
Plus, I feel like he had 3 or 4 different attacks. It made for a very diverse boss. I mean, when we were kids, who doesn't love climbing trees? So getting the opportunity to explore the inside of the giant Deku tree was a great idea.
And I think the remake really done good for the visuals in this dungeon. Yeah, it was like that for the whole game, but just like the vines right here.
Yep.
Just so much more detail. It actually looked like you were climbing something that was climbable.
Plus, all the doors look like, tree rings and bark and things like that. And how about that jump?
Love that jump right there and come crashing down in the water. I actually like that there's a little addition of water to the dungeon.
Me too.
Not a lot, but it's just enough.
This dungeon did lack a mini-boss, which I get it's the first dungeon of the game, but I feel like it could have used a little something.
Now, Queen Goma, she's really not that hard of a boss fight at all, but it makes sense that a spider would be the boss of this dungeon.
And also, I like the throwback to the original Legend of Zelda. Goma was one of the bosses or mini-bosses we fought in that game.
And I also like how she climbed around the top right there.
Yes.
She had a couple different attacks, she didn't get to them because we're so awesome.
Yes, we are.
Players, but it's an okay boss fight for the first one. Now, we really didn't plan this, but all 3 child dungeons ended up being at the bottom of our list.
They really did.
And this really isn't a bad dungeon. I just didn't think there was a lot to it.
There isn't, but that first opening room when you walk in and see the giant, Dodongo head on the wall, I thought was a great visual.
In the 3D remake, the lava and the fire, it just looked beautiful. It really stood out.
I love the visual when we bomb that giant pillar and it drops down into a staircase. Really like that visual.
Now, the item, I wasn't a big fan of the item. I think we should get that as an upgrade outside the dungeon.
Though I did like how we used bombs to bomb that giant Dodongo head. The mouth opens up. Just a really fun concept.
And then the boss, King Dodongo. I mean, just the first time, just remember how big he is. Now, he's not that hard of a boss, but throwing bombs inside a mouth, that's always fun.
Plus, just the visual of him rolling around, smashing into the walls, and you trying to get out of the way before he pops back up to and hit you again was just a really cool look. normally we're not a fan of like dark dungeons, but just the feeling of like death and morbidness in this one really makes it unique.
And because of that, I respect it in the game. I don't really like it much, but I respect it for what it is.
Now, I really love like the spinning blade traps, and the way those statues look is awesome.
And then this huge middle room right here, like you really don't see it coming with the guillotines that are also awesome. But I just love that room because it's a bunch of tunnels and small rooms, and then bam, here's a gigantic room.
Now, the 3DS remake eliminated the blood that was in the original Nintendo 64 version. Not a fan of that.
But that boat right there, we got some added visuals with that.
Love
and the statue on top of it looked amazing.
Now, we've always been fans of Bongo Bongo.
Yes.
Just shooting his hands, the design on the drum, or on the bongo, I should say.
It's just a cool boss. I mean, it's a boss that's playing a drum, and then also when he comes charging at you, it's actually kind of thrilling a little bit, kind of nerve-wracking.
I like the idea of like you trying to shoot him while he's bouncing you up and down in the air as well.
And then also how he dies, like banging on a drum. I just always loved that part. This, to me, was the biggest dungeon improvement between the original version and a 3D remake. Two reasons for that. One was having a button to equip the iron boots.
What a lifesaver.
Yes, and then the other was just the visuals of the dungeon. Like, for example, the water just looked gorgeous.
The water did. The redesigns on the walls and the doors, and the addition of these like neon lights to guide you to where the water changing places are.
Now, there were two things I didn't like. One was focusing down that hole in the middle of the pillar too much, and then they also make the Dark Link fight a little bit too easy in this remake.
And I'm not a huge fan of when the dungeon item is just like an upgraded version of like an item you already have, but the hook shot is awesome and the long shot is even more awesome.
And then the theme, actually, we've always been a huge fan of the theme of this dungeon. It's just like very relaxing, actually, which is nice for a difficult dungeon.
Not a fan of the boss though.
No, I'm not.
The boss was a big letdown after such a difficult dungeon.
There's just not much to it. I mean, it's just like, a tentacle of water, like a blob. It looks like a blob with a small nucleus that's somehow causing all these problems.
I really like the tradition in Zelda games of the final dungeon, like taking you back to revisit concepts we've had all throughout the game.
I like how they switched up some of them. Like with the force, you got a wind concept, and then with the water, you got an ice concept.
And just the idea of having like these 6 little areas you have to go through to unlock the main central
and
tower.
They're on the outside. And like you said, this main central tower we get here, and then like with the statue, and just I guess that's Pig Ganon's like face right there.
I guess he looks awesome.
Like in the remake too. In the remake, he looked awesome.
And the feeling of climbing this staircase, the theme changes and gets louder as you go. It's an epic approach to fight Ganondorf.
And then the cutscene we get with him, and then the room right here we're fighting him in. It took a bunch of attacks and combined them very quickly, like with the light orbs. And the light arrows, and then a hook shot, which I didn't use, but it did well with that.
And then escaping the castle as it collapsed around you, was a shock the first time you did it. And then just the visual was awesome.
And then Ganon, I mean, one word, bam, it's Ganon. Now, in the remake, he appeared a lot smaller. I didn't like that, but still, I mean, it's Ganon. It's such a fun boss fight. Just like the Dongo's Cavern, this place also, like the lava and the fire stood out.
Yes.
And one thing I've always loved about this dungeon is it actually feels like we're helping the Gorons.
Especially because when we first visit Goron City as an adult, it's abandoned, so now we get to see where they all are.
How about that platform right there over the fire? That just looks awesome right there. It's like so red.
And then the Flare Dancer, I thought, was a fun mini-boss fight.
You got the name right, actually.
I got the name right. I didn't like fighting him twice in the dungeon, but he was a cool boss.
Now, the verticality of the dungeon was actually kind of surprising. You saw that leeway up to the iron right there. Very nerve-wracking. Then also the Megaton hammer. What guy doesn't love using a hammer?
Oh, it's just a cool concept, especially using it to blast down that central pillar and drop all the way down right before the boss fight.
And Valvagia, I thought was also a great update in the remake.
Me too.
There's more detail, like a lot of things were, but he just stood out more.
And just the whole idea of fighting this flying, fire-breathing dragon and basically playing whack-a-mole with the skull and the hammer made for a really fun boss fight.
It fit the dungeon so well.
One of the coolest little additions to this remake is the opening cinematic here to the Forest Temple. We didn't get that in the original Nintendo 64 version.
And this was a great first adult dungeon. Like, you really just feel like a grown-up finally going through this part of the game.
Yeah, and plus just the feeling of this place being like an abandoned like fort or temple or something out in the middle of nowhere was really cool.
And I actually liked that it wasn't too linear. Like, it had some backtracking.
Agreed.
The corridors, how they were curved and you turned them. Like, it changed the layout of the dungeon.
I love that concept. Obviously, they expanded on Majora's Mask.
How about these rooms right here, too? Like, you got like, outside courtyard rooms, and like, they have a little bit of water. I really like that addition.
I didn't like fighting the pose so many times throughout this dungeon, but they weren't bad, though. They weren't bad.
Now, Phantom Ganon, it feels so cool that you're fighting Ganondorf, even though you're not this early in the game. And those pains were just a cool concept.
And then the idea of like deflecting the light orbs back at him, I was glad they brought that back from like the Aghanim fight in A Link to the Past.
And also, how about the room we're fighting them in? Just an awesome looking room right there. I love this dungeon because we get to go through it as Child Link and Adult Link, and it also has that ancient Egyptian feel to the dungeon.
And man, they found a theme that just fit that Egyptian look to it perfectly. Love this theme.
And the remake, I love how the stones look, just like on the side and like the floors. Like, just there's a lot more detail, as we saw in the rest of the game, but it really stood out in this one too.
I like how we leave the temple and go out to like the Desert Colossus to get the dungeon items. And how about the fact that we get 2 dungeon items in this temple?
And then how about the main room with the statue? Like, that's just a great detail in addition to the game.
And the way light is used in this dungeon, we don't really have a light temple anywhere in it, so like using mirrors and sunlight was a fun concept.
Now, Twin Roba, a really fun boss fight. I did not see the combination of ice and fire coming, but I thought it was a great little like wrinkle in the game.
And plus, like, just a great usage of your mirror shield, reflecting it back at them. And then the second stage of the fight felt like something totally different.
And she's like huge. I mean, that's a really big group fight right there. It's really intimidating.
Other than the last 2 dungeons on the list, you and I were all over the place in our individual rankings.
We had 1-2 switch. Now, with our original ranking, I got the Forest Temple as number 1, so this ranking, I went ahead and let Red have the Spirit Temple at number 1.
You're a swell guy. Thanks for letting me have it.
You're welcome. You know, I got one time.
Now, I do think your rankings changed a lot more in the 3DS version than mine did.
Just some of the dungeons and the visuals, like I really am a big fan of visuals, and it made certain dungeons, like the Water Temple, stand out a lot more.
And the Water Temple, along with like inside Ganon's Castle and Dodongo's Cavern, were definitely our biggest differences.
But it's so much fun going back to this ranking and redoing it, although like it really is a different ranking because of just all the upgrades.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page by clicking on the subscribe button at the top of the screen, which will take you to our page with over 1,000 Zelda videos.
You can also find us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, or check out our Facebook page and give us a like.
If you want to see a few more of our ranking videos,
which you know you do.
Absolutely. The video on the left will send you to our top 10 Zelda dungeons. The video on the right will send you to our Wind Waker HD dungeon ranking.
And then if you click on either one of those videos, it'll send you to a playlist where you can find our Zelda ranking videos.